They called her a leech, a nobody, a simple waitress looking for a payout. When Harrison Sterling walked into that courtroom, he didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to erase his wife, Daisy, from history. He stood before Judge Holloway and swore under oath that Daisy had never contributed a single hour of labor to his multi-million-dollar empire. He thought he had won. He was already planning the victory party. But he forgot one thing: the devil is in the details. And when the judge opened the evidence box and saw the same handwriting on the bottom of 10 years' worth of confidential files, Harrison's smirk didn't just fade, it shattered. This is the story of how a waitress brought down a tycoon without saying a word. The bell above the door at Lou's All-Night Diner chimed, cutting through the smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon. It was 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, usually the dead hour. But Daisy Linwood, technically Daisy Sterling, though she hadn't felt like a Sterling in years, didn't look up. She was too busy scraping dried maple syrup off table 4. "Daisy, you got a visitor." Lou, the owner, grunted from the pass-through window. He sounded nervous. Lou never sounded nervous. He was a man who had stared down armed robbers with a spatula. Daisy wiped her hands on her apron, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her feet throbbed. She was 42, but under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, the dark circles under her eyes made her look older. She turned toward the door. Standing there, looking like he had just stepped out of a GQ photo shoot, was Reginald P. Worthy. He was Harrison's personal fixer, a lawyer who cost more per hour than Daisy made in 6 months. He wore a navy pinstripe suit that probably cost more than the diner itself. Behind him stood a large, silent man holding a camera. "Oh, Mrs. Sterling," Reginald said, his voice dripping with faux politeness. He didn't step fully onto the greasy linoleum, as if afraid it might dissolve the soles of his Oxford shoes. "Reginald," Daisy said, her voice steady. "If Harrison wants his golf clubs, I told him they're in the storage unit." "This isn't about golf clubs, Daisy." Reginald snapped his fingers. The man with the camera raised it, the red light blinking. Reginald reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He walked over to table 4 and dropped it right where she had just cleaned. Thud. "You've been served," Reginald announced, projecting his voice so the 3 truck drivers in the back corner could hear. "Harrison has filed for divorce, irreconcilable differences, and given the circumstances, he is filing a motion for a summary judgment regarding the division of assets." Daisy didn't touch the envelope. "Summary judgment. What does that mean?" "Reginald." Reginald smirked. "It means Harrison is contesting the prenup. He is claiming sole ownership of Sterling and Associates. He is petitioning the court to award you 0 spousal support, citing that you have contributed nothing to the marriage or the business entity." The diner went silent. Even the fryer seemed to stop hissing. "Nothing," Daisy whispered. The word tasted like ash. "Come now, Daisy." Reginald chuckled, looking around the run-down diner. "Look at you. You're a waitress. Harrison is one of the most powerful corporate strategists in New York. You serve coffee. He serves justice. The narrative writes itself. He built the empire. You just lived in the house." Reginald leaned in closer, his cologne overpowering the smell of bacon. "He's offering you a settlement. The 2016 Honda Civic and $10,000. Take it, and we don't have to embarrass you in court." Daisy looked at the envelope. Then she looked at the camera. Finally, she looked Reginald in the eye. "He thinks I never worked," she asked. "He knows you never worked, not on anything that matters." Daisy picked up the envelope. It was heavy. "Tell Harrison I'll see him in court, and Reginald, tell him to check the archives." Reginald laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "There are no archives for waitresses, Daisy." He spun on his heel and marched out, his cameraman trailing behind. Daisy stood frozen in the middle of the diner. "You okay, kid?" Lou asked gently. Daisy looked down at her hands. They were chapped from dish soap and trembling with rage. She remembered the nights. Not the nights spent serving coffee, but the nights spent bent over a mahogany desk, red pen in hand, while Harrison snored on the couch, too drunk or too stupid to understand the complex merger documents he had to present the next morning. "I'm fine, Lou," Daisy said, her voice hardening into steel. "I need to make a phone call, and I need to find a box of old tax returns. To understand the sheer audacity of Harrison Sterling's claim, you have to go back 15 years. Before the penthouse on 5th Avenue, before the feature articles in Forbes, and before the mistress named Chloe, who was young enough to be his daughter, Harrison was a drowning man. He was 27, fresh out of a mid-tier law school with a mountain of debt, and a father who called him a disappointment. He had managed to land a junior associate position at a prestigious firm through nepotism, but he was drowning in the workload. Harrison had charisma, he had looks, and he had ambition, but he lacked the one thing a lawyer actually needs: attention to detail. Daisy met him at a library. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't even a college graduate. She had dropped out of community college to care for her sick mother, taking double shifts at a diner to pay the medical bills. But Daisy had a mind like a steel trap. She read legal thrillers for fun. She did the New York Times crossword in pen in under 10 minutes. Harrison had been weeping, actually weeping with his head on a pile of documents. "Rough night?" she had asked, dropping a book off at the return cart. "I'm going to get fired," Harrison had groaned, looking up at her with bloodshot eyes. "I have to summarize these 3,000 pages of discovery for the Henderson merger by 800 a.m. I'm on page 50. The syntax, it makes no sense." Daisy glanced at the page open in front of him. "That's not syntax. That's a standard liability clause, but it's poorly drafted. See, they're hiding the debt in the subsidiary shell company." Harrison stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I read a lot," she shrugged, "and you're holding the page upside down." That night, Daisy didn't go home. She sat with Harrison. She organized the files. She highlighted the critical data. She practically wrote the summary for him. When he presented it the next morning, the partners were stunned. Harrison got a promotion. He took her to dinner to celebrate. They married 6 months later. Harrison promised her the world. "We're a team, Daisy," he had said at the altar. "You're the brains, I'm the face. We'll build something huge." And they did. Or rather, she did. For the first 10 years of their marriage, the routine was immutable. Harrison would come home at 6:00 p.m., complaining about his clients throwing files onto the dining table. "I can't do it, Daisy. It's too much. The contract for the tech venture acquisition, it's a mess." "Go take a shower, Harrison. Pour yourself a drink," she would say, already reaching for the red pen. While Harrison watched football or went out for networking drinks with potential clients, Daisy worked. She sat at the dining table and later the home office desk until 300 or 400 in the morning. She didn't just proofread, she strategized. She found the loophole that saved his biggest client, Titanium Industries, from a hostile takeover. She drafted the non-disclosure agreements that became the industry standard in his sector. She organized the filing systems. Because Harrison was notoriously disorganized and cheap in the early days, he refused to hire a paralegal or a secretary. "Why pay someone when I trust you more?" he would say, kissing her on the forehead before going to bed, leaving her with a stack of paperwork 3 inches thick. But there was a catch. Harrison was paranoid. He didn't want the firm to know his wife, a waitress with no degree, was doing his work. It would ruin his image as the golden boy. "Just sign it as a witness," he told her one night early on. "It's just internal compliance. Put your initials on the bottom of the intake forms so I know they've been reviewed. It's our code." So she did. On every client intake form, every strategy draft, every compliance check, and every sealed evidence log, she signed a small, elegant signature, DL reviewed. She was the invisible engine. Then came the money, millions of it. Harrison bought the suits, the cars, the penthouse. He insisted Daisy quit the diner. "It looks bad," he said. "My wife serving burgers." But he didn't let her join the firm officially. "You don't have the license, Daisy. It's illegal. You have to stay in the background." She accepted it because she loved him. She thought they were building a future. Then 6 months ago, the dynamic shifted. Harrison stopped bringing work home. He stopped complaining. He became cold, distant. He started hiding his phone. Daisy found the credit card receipts first. Jewelry stores, hotels. Then she found the texts from Chloe, a 24-year-old paralegal he had finally hired. When she confronted him, Harrison didn't apologize. He laughed. "You're old news, Daisy. You're boring. You just sit around this house all day while I'm out there conquering the world." "I built your world," she had screamed. "You?" Harrison sneered. "You're a waitress I picked up in a library. You haven't worked a day in our marriage. I paid for everything. The food you eat, the clothes on your back. You are a dependent, nothing more." He cut off her credit cards the next day. He froze the joint accounts. Daisy, with zero cash flow and too much pride to beg, went back to the only place that would take her, without a resume gap explanation, Lou's all-night diner. She worked double shifts serving eggs to truckers, while Harrison prepared to destroy her in court. He genuinely believed his own lie. He had spent so many years taking credit for her work that he had actually forgotten she did it. He thought the magic just happened. He thought he was a genius. Back in the present, inside her small rented studio apartment, Daisy sat on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes. These weren't the files from his office. He had locked her out of those. These were the trash boxes. Harrison was a hoarder of physical drafts. He believed in keeping originals in the basement just in case the cloud failed. When he kicked her out, he had thrown boxes of her junk onto the curb. He thought they were just old magazines and recipes. Daisy opened the first box. It smelled of mildew and expensive cologne. Inside wasn't junk. It was the Titanium Industries merger drafts. The handwritten notes were hers. The corrections were hers. And there at the bottom of the privileged and confidential cover sheet in blue ink that had faded slightly over time was that small, elegant script. Witnessed and verified by D.L. Daisy, picked up another file. And another. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. It wasn't a high-powered lawyer. She couldn't afford one. It was a man named Saul, a retired contract attorney who ate at the diner every Thursday and always tipped $5 on a $4 coffee. He hated bullies. "Saul," Daisy said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "It's Daisy from Lou's. You know how you said if I ever needed legal advice to call you. I remember." Saul's raspy voice came through. "I'm going to need you to represent me. Against Harrison Sterling." Saul whistled. "That's a big shark, Daisy. You got bait." Daisy looked at the mountain of paper spread across her floor, thousands of documents, every single one bearing her mark on the intellectual property Harrison claimed was solely his. "Saul." She smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that Harrison had never seen. "I don't just have bait. I have the whole damn boat." Saul Berkowitz lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn that smelled of old pipe tobacco and dust. It was the kind of place where time seemed to have stopped in 1995. Books were stacked in towers that reached the ceiling towers that defied gravity and fire codes. When Daisy arrived with 3 plastic bins strapped to a dolly she had borrowed from the diner, Saul didn't offer to help carry them. He just held the door open, his suspenders straining against a plaid shirt that had seen better decades. "Kitchen table," Saul grunted, pointing with his cane. "Move the cat." Daisy spent the next hour organizing. She laid the documents out, not by date, but by case. The Titanium Industries merger, the Redwood Estate litigation, the O'Malley patent dispute. Saul made tea. It was bitter, served in chipped mugs. He sat down, adjusted his thick bifocals, and picked up the first file, the Redwood Brief, from 2014. The room was silent for 20 minutes. The only sound was the rustling of paper and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Finally, Saul looked up. The skepticism that had lived in his eyes since Daisy first called him was gone. It was replaced by something else. Fear. "Daisy," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You didn't just review these. You didn't just proofread them for spelling errors." "No," Daisy said quietly, staring at her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "Harrison he was good at talking. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. But the law, the logic, he couldn't follow the thread. He would get lost in the subclauses. I had to map it out for him." Saul tapped a paragraph on page 42. "This citation here, the reference to Dolry Map Vu, Ohio, regarding the exclusion of evidence in a civil asset forfeiture case. That's obscure. That's brilliant. Harrison Sterling didn't write this. I've heard Harrison argue in court. The man speaks in headlines, not footnotes." "I wrote it," Daisy confirmed. "It was 2:00 a.m. He was passed out on the rug. We had a deadline at 8:00 a.m. If we missed it, the firm would have lost the retainer." Saul took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Do you realize what you've done, kid? You haven't just been a supportive wife. You've been practicing law without a license for 15 years. If this comes out, Harrison gets disbarred. But you could be in trouble too." "I don't care," Daisy said, her voice trembling, but her chin high. "He says I'm a leech, Saul. He told the court I sat on the couch eating bonbons while he broke his back. He wants to leave me with nothing. I don't want his money. I want the truth." Saul stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rainy street. "The truth is a tricky thing in divorce court, Daisy. Judge Holloway is an old-school stickler. He hates theatrics. He loves paper trails." Saul turned back to the table. "You said you signed them. Initials," Daisy said. "DL. Just a little scribble. Harrison insisted. He said it was for internal tracking, to make sure he didn't mix up the drafts I had fixed with the raw ones." Saul picked up a magnifying glass, an actual magnifying glass, and peered at the bottom corner of a yellowed page. "There it is," he whispered. "Witnessed and verified by DL." He looked at Daisy. "Does he know you have these?" "No. He thinks they're trash. He threw them out when he remodeled the Home Office for Chloe. He said he wanted a minimalist aesthetic." Saul smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that revealed a gold tooth. Arrogance. It's always the arrogance that kills the king. Meanwhile, across the city, Harrison Sterling stood in his office on the 40th floor of the Sterling & Associates building. The view of Manhattan was breathtaking, a sea of lights that he felt he owned. Reginald P. Worthy sat on the leather sofa, scrolling through a tablet. "The motion is filed, Harrison," Reginald said, sounding bored. "We've frozen her access to the Hampton house. We've locked the joint accounts. She's currently working at a greasy spoon in Queens. It's pathetic, really. The optics are perfect for us. Wealthy man outgrows simple wife. The judge will give her a pittance and send her on her way." Harrison swirled the scotch in his glass. "Make sure she doesn't get the jag. I promised it to Chloe." "She won't get the jag," Reginald assured him. "She won't get the coffee maker if you don't want her to." "But Harrison, I need to ask, is there anything she has on you, any leverage?" Harrison laughed. It was a deep, resonant laugh that had charmed juries for a decade. "Leverage Daisy." He took a sip. "Reggie, the woman, barely finished community college. She doesn't know how to balance a checkbook, let alone build a legal case. She's a ghost. I made her up. Without me, she doesn't exist." He walked to his desk where a sleek new computer monitor hummed. He clicked on a folder labeled Old Archives. "Just to be safe," Harrison said, "I'm having it wipe the metadata from the old servers, scrubbing the edit history on the documents from 2010 to 2020. Clean slate." "Smart." Reginald nodded. "No digital footprints." Harrison hit delete. He watched the progress bar fill up. 100%. "Gone," Harrison grinned. Now she truly has never worked a day in her life. He didn't know that the paper ghosts were sitting on a kitchen table in Brooklyn, being sorted by a man who hadn't lost a case since 1989. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in the conference room of Worthy Pinter and Associates was cold enough to preserve meat. The room was aggressively modern, all glass, chrome, and white marble. It was designed to intimidate. Daisy sat on one side of the massive table wearing a charcoal blazer she had bought at a thrift store for $12. She had ironed it 3 times. Her hands were folded in her lap, hiding the fact that her knuckles were white. Next to her sat Saul. In this gleaming boardroom, Saul looked like a relic. He wore a rumpled beige suit that was slightly too large, and he was slowly unwrapping a butterscotch candy. The crinkling sound of the wrapper seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silence. Across the table sat Harrison and Reginald. Harrison looked impeccable in a 3-piece charcoal suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He refused to look at Daisy. He stared at a spot on the wall just above her head, his expression one of bored annoyance. A court reporter sat at the end of the table, fingers hovering over her stenotype machine. A videographer stood ready. "We are on the record," Reginald announced, his voice smooth and oily. "This is the deposition of Harrison Sterling in the matter of Sterling v. Sterling." Reginald leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Berkowitz, you may proceed." Saul finished chewing his candy. He took a slow sip of water. He adjusted his glasses. He looked confused, like he wasn't quite sure why he was there. "Right," Saul said, his voice raspy. "Sterling. Hello." Harrison gave a curt nod. "Mr. Berkowitz, let's make this quick. I have a lunch meeting at 1. Of course. Busy man," Saul mumbled. He shuffled some papers, blank papers mostly. "Now the core of your claim. You state that your wife Daisy made no significant contribution to the acquisition of marital assets. Is that correct?" "That is correct," Harrison said firmly. "No financial contribution." "None. She was a housewife." "And no intellectual contribution?" Saul asked, looking over the top of his glasses. Harrison scoffed, a small dismissive puff of air. "Intellectual. My wife is a waitress, Mr. Berkowitz. Her expertise is in menu memorization, not corporate law. Reginald smirked. Daisy felt a flush of heat rise up her neck, but she remembered Saul's instructions. Don't react. Let him dig. I see, Saul said, writing something down slowly. So the firm, Sterling and Associates, you built that alone, entirely, Harrison said. Blood, sweat, and tears. I worked 18-hour days for years. 18 hours, Saul repeated. That's a lot. Did you do all the drafting yourself? In the beginning. Yes, I didn't have the budget for support staff. What about the Titanium Industries merger in 2012? Saul asked. He didn't look at his notes. He just looked at Harrison. Harrison blinked. What about it? That was the case that put you on the map, wasn't it? It was a landmark victory. Harrison agreed, his chest puffing out slightly. I found a precedent in the 1998 Telecom Act that allowed us to bypass the monopoly restrictions. You found it? Saul asked. Yes, I spent 3 nights in the law library digging it up. Daisy closed her eyes for a second. She remembered those 3 nights. Harrison had been at a bachelor party in Vegas. She had been the one in the library, with a fever of 102, desperately searching for a loophole because he had called her screaming that he was going to lose the client. And the drafting of the final agreement, Saul pressed. The syntax was very specific, very complex. I have a unique writing style, Harrison lied smoothly. I drafted every word of that agreement. Is that so? Saul reached into his battered briefcase. He didn't pull out the file yet. He just left his hand there. And you swear this under oath, that no one else, not a paralegal, not an intern, and certainly not your wife, assisted in the research, drafting, or verification of that document. Reginald leaned forward. He sensed a trap, but he couldn't see it. Objection. Asked and answered. Mr. Sterling has already stated he did the work. I'm just clarifying, Saul said innocently, because perjury is a nasty business, Harrison. I'd hate for you to misremember. Harrison leaned over the table, his eyes cold and hard, locking onto Daisy. I don't misremember, old man. I wrote it. Daisy was probably watching reality TV while I was doing it. She doesn't understand that level of work. She never has. Daisy looked up. She met his gaze. For the first time in months, Harrison saw something in her eyes that unsettled him. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't love. It was pity. Okay, Saul said. He pulled his hand out of the briefcase, empty. Let's move on to the O'Malley patent case. 2015. You won that on a technicality regarding the timestamp of the filing. Who noticed the timestamp error? I did. Harrison said faster this time. I have an eye for detail. An eye for detail, Saul repeated. Interesting, because in your initial filing for divorce, you misspelled your own middle name. Harrison flushed red. That was a clerical error by my secretary. So you do rely on others for paperwork. For trivialities, not for legal strategy. Harrison snapped. He was losing his cool. The golden boy veneer was cracking. Saul went on for 2 hours. He walked Harrison through 10 years of his career, case by case, document by document. And every single time, Harrison claimed sole, absolute credit. He erased Daisy from every late night, every breakthrough, every saved disaster. He painted a picture of himself as a solitary genius carrying the dead weight of a lazy wife. By the time it was over, Harrison was sweating. Not from fear, he still thought he was winning, but from the exertion of maintaining the lie. We're done here, Reginald said. slamming his notebook shut. "You're fishing Berkowitz. You have nothing. My client has established that he is the sole generator of wealth. We expect a settlement agreement by Friday, or we will see you in trial." Reginald stood up. Harrison stood up, buttoning his jacket. Harrison walked around the table to where Daisy was sitting. He leaned down close to her ear. "You should have taken the 10 grand, Daisy," he whispered. "Now you're going to end up with legal fees you can't pay and a life you can't afford. Go back to the diner. It's where you belong." Daisy didn't flinch. She waited until he pulled back. "Harrison," she said softly. "What?" he snapped. "Do you remember the blue pen?" Harrison frowned. "What? The blue Pilot G2 pen, 0.7 millimeter. You always hated them. You only used black ink, Mont Blanc fountain pens." "Who cares about pens?" Harrison sneered. "I do," Daisy said. "I really, really do." Harrison rolled his eyes and stormed out, Reginald trailing behind him like a loyal dog. When the door clicked shut, the room fell silent. Saul let out a long, heavy sum and unwrapped another butterscotch. "Well," Saul said, popping the candy into his mouth. He took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. "He lied about everything," Daisy said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "He lied about the titanium deal. He lied about the Redwood brief. He put it all on the record." "He sure did." Saul patted the stack of papers in front of him. "And now, we let him think he's won. We let him get comfortable. We let him walk into that courtroom, thinking he's God's gift to jurisprudence." Saul looked at Daisy. "You ready for the main event, kid? Because once we drop those boxes on Judge Holloway's bench, there's no going back. You're going to burn his reputation to the ground." Daisy looked at the empty chair where her husband had sat lying with such ease. She thought of the years of silence, the years of being the little woman in the background. "Burn it," Daisy said. "Burn it all." The week before the trial, Harrison Sterling threw a dinner party. It was held in the private dining room of Le Coucou, a place where the napkins were linen and the water was imported from glaciers that no longer existed. He was surrounded by his sycophants, junior partners, potential investors, and, of course, Chloe. Chloe looked stunning in a red dress that cost more than Daisy's entire wardrobe. But she looked bored. She was scrolling through Instagram under the table. "To freedom," Harrison toasted, raising a glass of vintage Dom Perignon, "and to trimming the fat." The table laughed. It was a cruel, knowing laugh. Everyone knew who the fat was. "So the hearing is next Tuesday?" asked Brad, a hedge fund manager with a predatory grin. "Is she going to settle?" "She's stubborn." Harrison sighed, performing the role of the beleaguered genius. "She's hired some strip mall ambulance chaser. Berkowitz or Berkeley, I can't remember. The guy looks like he sleeps in his car. They're trying to drag it out, hoping I'll write a check just to make them go away. But I have principles, Brad. You don't pay for work that wasn't done." "Amen," Brad said. Just then, Harrison's phone buzzed. It was an email notification from a client tech venture. "Harrison, the clause in the acquisition draft regarding IP retention is missing. We discussed this. Fix it by morning or the deal is dead." Harrison frowned. He turned to Chloe. "Babe, did you not add the IP retention clause to the tech venture file? I left the sticky note on your desk." Chloe looked up, blinking. "Oh, I thought that was a suggestion. The language was so boring. I didn't think it mattered." Harrison felt a vein in his temple throb. "It matters, Chloe. It's the entire reason they're buying the company." "Well, don't yell at me," she pouted. "Just do it yourself. You're the genius, right?" Harrison stared at her. For a split second, the perfume and the youth and the adoration faded, and he felt a cold, hollow pang in his chest. He remembered 2011, the Garrison merger. He had forgotten a similar clause. Daisy hadn't waited to be asked. She hadn't pouted. She had rewritten the entire section while he was in the shower, placed it in his briefcase, and simply whispered, "Check page 12," as he walked out the door. He shook the memory off. Daisy was the past. She was a waitress. This was just a hiccup. "I'll handle it," Harrison snapped, draining his glass. "Reginald, are we ready for Tuesday?" Reginald P. Worthy was busy cutting a piece of steak. "Completely. We received their evidence disclosure this morning." And nothing." Reginald chewed dismissively. "It's 4 binders. Probably just character references from her diner friends and some sob stories about her mother's medical bills. I didn't waste billable hours reading through her diary entries. We'll object to relevance and have it all thrown out before lunch." Harrison smiled. "Perfect. Let's crush them." 3 miles away, in the cramped, dust-mote-filled office of Saul Berkowitz, the atmosphere was very different. There was no champagne. There was cold Chinese takeout and the hum of a laser printer that sounded like it was dying of emphysema. Daisy was pacing. She had memorized every document, every date, every lie. But the fear was a physical weight in her stomach. "He's going to charm them, Saul," she said, stopping in front of the window that looked out onto a brick wall. "You know how he is. He walks into a room and the temperature changes. He'll make me look like a crazy ex-wife." Saul was sitting in his leather chair, which was held together by duct tape. He was polishing his glasses with a tie that he wasn't wearing. "Let him charm," Saul said softly. "Charm is cheap, Daisy. Evidence is expensive. Harrison is used to winning because he controls the narrative. He talks fast, he uses big words, and people assume he's right because he's rich. But Judge Percival Holloway." Saul chuckled a dry, rattling sound. "Holloway is 72 years old. He has gout. He hates liars. And he hates wasted time. He doesn't care about charm. He cares about the paper." Saul stood up and walked over to the 4 binders sitting on his desk. They weren't labeled diary entries. They were labeled Exhibit A through Z. "We didn't ambush them, Daisy," Saul said, tapping the binders. "We followed the rules. We sent them everything. Every single page where you fixed his mistakes. Every time you signed DL. If Reginald was a good lawyer, he would have opened these binders, seen what was inside, and called us 10 minutes later begging to settle for half of Harrison's empire." Daisy looked at the binders. "But he didn't call." "No." Saul grinned, his gold tooth catching the light of the desk lamp. "Because he's arrogant. He assumes a waitress has nothing to say. That is their fatal flaw, kid. They don't see you. They never have." Saul handed her a file. "Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you don't wear the waitress uniform. Tomorrow you wear the suit." "I don't have a suit," Daisy whispered. Saul reached behind his desk and pulled out a garment bag. "My daughter. She's about your size. She's a prosecutor in Chicago. She left this last time she visited. It's navy blue. It's armor. Wear it." Daisy took the bag. Her eyes welled up. "Thank you, Saul." "Don't thank me yet," Saul grunted, sitting back down and picking up a spring roll. "Thank me when Harrison Sterling forgets how to speak English." The New York State Supreme Court building was imposing a fortress of gray stone designed to make everyone who entered feel small. Tuesday morning was gray and drizzling. Harrison arrived in a black SUV. He stepped out, flanked by Reginald and 2 junior associates. He wore a navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that projected power and stability. He waved to a photographer, one he had tipped off himself. Daisy arrived 10 minutes later in a yellow taxi. She stepped out into a puddle. She was wearing the navy suit Saul had given her. It fit perfectly. She had pulled her hair back into a severe, elegant bun. She wore no makeup, just her glasses. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like a CEO. Harrison saw her in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. He paused, his eyes scanning her up and down. For a moment he looked confused. "Nice suit," he sneered as he passed her. "Did you rent it?" "Good morning, Harrison," Daisy said calmly. Her voice didn't shake. Inside the courtroom was wood-panelled and smelled of floor wax. Judge Percival Holloway sat on the bench like a gargoyle. He was a small man with bushy white eyebrows and a permanent scowl. He was shuffling papers, looking already annoyed that he had to be there. "Case number 4492B, Sterling v. Sterling," the bailiff announced. Reginald stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor." "Ready for the defendant," Saul rasped, not bothering to stand up fully, just raising a hand. "Opening statements," Judge Holloway grunted. "Keep them brief. I have a sentencing hearing at 3. Reginald walked to the center of the room. He didn't use notes. He was smooth, practiced. "Your Honor, this case is simple. It is about a man who built an empire through genius and grit, and a woman who enjoyed the fruits of that labor without contributing a seed. We are not here to punish Mrs. Sterling. We are here to ensure that justice reflects reality. And the reality is that Harrison Sterling is the sole architect of Sterling and Associates. Mrs. Sterling was a domestic partner, yes, but a business partner, absolutely not." Reginald sat down, looking pleased. Saul stood up. He walked slowly to the podium, leaning on the wood. "Your Honor," Saul said, his voice scratchy. "We agree with Mr. Worthy on one thing. This case is about the architect of Sterling and Associates. We just disagree on who that architect is." Harrison scoffed audibly from his table. Judge Holloway shot him a sharp look. "Call your first witness," the judge ordered. Harrison took the stand. For the next hour, Reginald led Harrison through a rehearsed narrative. Harrison was charming. He was humble. He talked about the sleepless nights in the early days. "I remember the titanium deal," Harrison said, looking earnestly at the judge. 2012. The pressure was immense. I was up for 3 days straight drafting the liability clauses. I knew that if I missed one comma, the deal would fall through. My wife, she was asleep. I didn't blame her. It wasn't her world. "And you did this work entirely alone?" Reginald asked. "Entirely," Harrison said. "I am the only one with the clearance and the capability to handle those files." "Thank you. No further questions." Judge Holloway turned to Saul. "Cross-examination. Mr. Berkowitz." Saul stood up. He picked up a binder, one of the 4 he had placed on the evidence table. He walked slowly toward the witness stand. He looked like a confused grandfather asking for directions. "Mr. Sterling," Saul began, "you have a very impressive memory." "I do," Harrison said, relaxing. This old man was no threat. "You mentioned the titanium deal, 2012, landmark case. You said you wrote the liability clauses alone." "I did." "Interesting," Saul mumbled. He opened the binder. "Because I have the original draft here, not the digital copy, the physical draft, the one from your archives." Harrison frowned slightly. "Okay. Now, in 2012, you were using a standard word processor, but you were known for making handwritten edits in the margins before finalizing correct, 'Yes, my process is tactile.' Right. Tactile. Saul pulled a page out of the plastic sleeve. Can you identify this document? Harrison squinted. It looks like page 40 of the titanium brief. It is. Now look at the margin. There is a note here in blue ink. It says, Paragraph 4, conflicts with Section C. Remove, or we expose the client to SEC violation. Harrison nodded. Yes, I remember catching that. You caught it? Yes. In blue ink. Harrison paused. He remembered Daisy's comment during the deposition. The blue pilot G2. But he couldn't back down now. I use many pens, Mr. Berkowitz. Sometimes I lose my Mont Blanc and grab whatever is around. I see. Saul turned the page. And this note on page 42. Citation incorrect. Use 12 U.S. Code 1998. Also blue ink. Also your handwriting. Yes. Harrison said, his voice tightening. It's my handwriting. I was rushing. It's very neat for rushing, Saul observed. He walked back to his table and picked up another piece of paper. Mr. Sterling, I have here a birthday card you wrote to your mother in 2012. Would you say this is a fair sample of your handwriting? Saul handed the card to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Judge Holloway looked at the card, then at the document Saul had just submitted. The handwriting on the card is quite jagged, Saul noted. Spiky. The handwriting on the legal brief is round, looped, almost feminine. Objection, Reginald shouted, standing up. Speculation handwriting analysis is not. I'm not doing analysis. Saul interrupted, his voice suddenly losing its rasp and becoming sharp as a razor. I'm asking the witness to identify his own work. Saul turned back to Harrison. Mr. Sterling, you swore under oath that you reviewed every single file for internal compliance, that you were the final gatekeeper. I was. Then tell me, Saul said, pulling a new document from the binder. What is this symbol at the bottom right corner of every single page of the titanium brief? He placed the document on the overhead projector. On the screen, magnified for the whole room to see, was the bottom corner of the page. There, in that same faded blue ink, was a small, distinct mark. Witnessed and verified. D.L. The room went silent. D.L. Saul read aloud. Now, your middle name is James. Your initials are H.J.S. Who is D.L.? Mr. Sterling. Harrison stared at the screen. His mouth went dry. He had seen that mark 1,000 times. He had told her to put it there. Just so I know you checked it. He never thought it would be seen by anyone else. He thought he had thrown these away. It's just a clerical code, Harrison stammered. It means Master Legal. It's a filing category. Master Legal. Saul raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Saul flipped the page on the projector. Witnessed and verified, D.L. He flipped another. Witnessed and verified, D.L. He flipped 10 pages rapidly. D.L. 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 You have a lot of Master Legal files, Mr. Sterling, and strangely enough, this code appears on the Redwood brief. Saul slapped another file onto the projector. D.L. And the O'Malley patent. Slap. D.L. And the Henderson merger. Slap. D.L. Saul walked right up to the witness stand. He leaned in close. Harrison could smell the peppermint breath mint Saul had just popped. Mr. Sterling, Saul whispered, but the microphone caught every word. "Is it your testimony that Master Legal is a filing code? Because if I call a handwriting expert to the stand, will they tell me that Master Legal writes its M exactly the way your wife Daisy Linwood writes hers?" Harrison froze. He looked at Reginald. Reginald was pale, staring at the open binder on his own table, finally realizing what he had ignored. Harrison looked at the judge. Judge Holloway was leaning forward, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, staring at the screen. The judge looked from the screen to Daisy, then to Harrison. The look on the judge's face was not boredom anymore. It was the look of a man who had just found a cockroach in his soup. Harrison started, but his voice failed him. "Remind the witness he is under oath," Judge Holloway barked. "Mr. Sterling," Saul said, his voice booming now, "did you write the note in blue ink, or did Daisy Linwood write it?" Harrison gripped the railing of the witness stand. If he admitted it, he was a perjurer. If he lied, he was about to be proven a perjurer. She might have proofread some things," Harrison whispered. "Proofread." Saul laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Mr. Sterling, I'm looking at page 50 of the Tech Venture acquisition. There is a whole paragraph crossed out. And in the margin in blue ink, it says, 'Harrison, you idiot, this is illegal in the EU. Use the Luxembourg subsidiary.'" A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a second. Saul pointed a shaking finger at Harrison. "Did you call yourself an idiot in the margins of your own legal brief, Mr. Sterling? Or was that the unemployed waitress saving your career from an international lawsuit?" Harrison's jaw dropped. He looked at Daisy. Daisy was sitting perfectly still. She wasn't smiling. She was just watching him, her face calm, serene, and absolutely terrifying. Harrison realized then with a sinking horror that the archives he had deleted from the server were nothing. The ghosts were real, and they were all written in blue ink. The silence that followed Saul's question was heavy, suffocating. It hung in the air like smoke. Harrison Sterling, the man who had terrified junior partners and charmed billionaire investors, looked small. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at Reginald P. Worthy, his high-priced fixer. Reginald was busy staring at the ceiling, distancing himself from the blast radius. Harrison croaked. He cleared his throat. "It was a collaborative process. I may have overlooked the extent of her input." "Overlooked?" Judge Holloway's voice boomed from the bench. It wasn't a shout. It was a low rumble of thunder. "Mr. Sterling, you stood in my courtroom not an hour ago and testified that this woman contributed nothing. You called her a waitress. You claimed sole authorship of documents that clearly bear her handwriting, her corrections, and her verification codes." The judge leaned over the bench, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. "And now I am looking at a document where you, the supposed legal genius, were corrected on a basic point of European law by your wife. And you accepted that correction, which means you knew. You knew she was doing the work." "It was unauthorized," Harrison shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. She went through my briefcase. She tampered with files. Tampered," Saul interjected calmly. "Harrison, you signed these drafts. You submitted them to the court and to the SEC. If she tampered with them, and you signed them without checking, you are incompetent. If you knew she wrote them, and you signed them, claiming they were yours, you are a fraud. Which is it?" Harrison froze. It was the perfect trap. There was no third door. Harrison slumped. The fight left him. He looked at Daisy, hoping for mercy, hoping she would remember the good times, the early days. Daisy stood up. She walked to the center of the room. She didn't look at Harrison. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I didn't do it to steal his company. I did it because I loved him. I wanted him to succeed. I spent 15 years building him up, fixing his mistakes and hiding in the shadows so he could shine. I didn't want the credit. I just wanted a partner." But he didn't see a partner. He saw a servant. She turned to Harrison then. "You asked if I rented this suit, Harrison. No, I bought it, with the tips I made serving coffee to truck drivers, because that's what I do. I work. I have always worked. You're the one who's been pretending." Judge Holloway slammed his gavel down. Bang! "The court has heard enough," the judge declared. "The evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Sterling, your motion for a summary judgment is denied. Furthermore, based on the evidence of perjury and the misrepresentation of assets, I am granting the counter-motion filed by Mr. Berkowitz." The judge picked up a pen. "The court recognizes a constructive trust. The intellectual property of Sterling and Associates was built on the labor of Mrs. Sterling. Therefore, the division of assets will not be equal." Harrison held his breath. "Mrs. Sterling is awarded the marital home, the liquid assets in the joint accounts, and 60% of the future royalties from the Titanium, Redwood, and O'Malley contracts, which she clearly authored." "Objection," Reginald squeaked. "That will bankrupt the firm." "Then perhaps Mr. Sterling should have drafted better contracts," Judge Holloway shot back. "Additionally, I am referring the transcript of this trial to the State Bar Association. They might be interested to know that Mr. Sterling has been billing clients $900 an hour for work performed by an unlicensed, albeit highly competent, ghostwriter." Harrison's face went white. It wasn't just the money. It was his license, his identity. "Court is adjourned." The bailiff stood. "All rise." Harrison sat there paralyzed as the room emptied. Reginald packed his briefcase and left without a word. The sycophants, the junior associates, the photographers, they all vanished. Daisy walked out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Saul was waiting. He handed her a butterscotch candy. "You did good, kid," Saul smiled. "Real good." "What happens to him now?" Daisy asked. "He faces a disbarment hearing." Saul shrugged. "He'll probably settle. He'll keep the firm, maybe, but he'll be a pariah. The clients will leave. The golden boy is tarnished." Daisy took a deep breath. She looked out of the window at the rain clearing over the Manhattan skyline. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't feel tired. She didn't feel invisible. "I have to go, Saul," she said. "Back to the diner." Daisy smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a letter she had received that morning. It was an acceptance letter from Columbia Law School, a mature student program. "No," Daisy said. "I have a lot of studying to do, but this time I'm getting the degree for myself." She walked down the hall, her heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving the ghost of Harrison Sterling behind her. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't Mrs. Sterling. She was Daisy. And she was just getting started. Harrison Sterling spent the next decade trying to rebuild, but the magic was gone. Without Daisy to fix the details, his carelessness caught up with him. He lost the tech venture account. He lost the penthouse. Last anyone heard, he was working as a consultant for a mid-sized insurance firm in Jersey, complaining to anyone who would listen about how his ex-wife stole his life. Daisy, on the other hand, graduated at the top of her class. She opened her own firm, Linwood and Berkowitz, specializing in intellectual property and family law. She became known as the fiercest litigator in New York, a woman who checked every footnote, read every margin, and never, ever underestimated the person bringing her coffee. Because she knew the truth, the person serving the table might just own the building one day. Harrison thought he could erase her. He thought that because she didn't have a title, she didn't have power. He learned the hard way that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one taking notes. What do you think? Did Harrison deserve to lose his license, or was the 60% settlement enough? And would you have the courage to start over, like Daisy did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know who is really running the show.